All right, you guys, question number 25. Now, this is kind of a tricky question, so we want to pay attention here. If you got this question wrong, you probably chose answer choice B, because you're going to be down to either B or C here. And sometimes students will choose B without kind of thinking about the logical meaning that's created when you plug in B. So we'll talk about all of that stuff right in this video. So the first thing that I notice when I look at the answer choices is I know I'm being tested on punctuation. Why? Because I know answer choice A has like a semicolon, answer choice C here has a comma, and then the other answer choices don't have any punctuation, and we have the word like and, right? That's kind of mixed into this. So I know that one of the things I'm being tested on is punctuation, and therefore, whenever I'm tested on punctuation, I know I'm always going to be tested on sentence structure as well. So again, when I think about sentence structure, I'm thinking about, is this sentence written grammatically, right? We talked about this in a previous video. A grammatical sentence is a sentence that has all of the punctuations written correctly. They're all in its proper places, right? And all of the components or the parts of the sentence, right, are written correctly. And they all fit together to make a logical meaning, right? The sentence has a logical meaning that's created. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. Now, how you want to read for sentence structure is you want to consider sentence structure in the back of your mind, right? So when you're reading the passage, of course, the main priority is to focus on what the writer is saying, but in the back of your mind, you want to be thinking about sentence structure, right? And the way that I think about sentence structure is just in two simple ways. One of the ways is I ask myself, is this a complete sentence? Right? And the second question that I ask is this a run-on? And the reason why I ask myself those questions is I know that the two most common errors for sentence structure are sentence fragments, incomplete sentences, right? And run-on sentences. A run-on sentence when you have two independent clauses that are not properly punctuated. Okay, so that's how I read for sentence structure. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like right here. So this is a hard question, by the way, as most sentence structure questions are, right? And I'll kind of explain why this question is kind of difficult as we go through it. So the passage reads, in her analysis of Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, scholar Candace Wade observes that the novel depicts the upper classes of New York society as consumed by the appetite of a soulless materialism, and an apt assessment given that the House of Mirth is set during the Gilded Age, a period marked by rapid industrialization, economic greed, and widening wealth of disparities. So the first reason why this question is difficult is because this entire thing is just one sentence long, right? So it's a super, super long sentence, and it has a lot of components or a lot of parts to it. So what I mean by components is, for example, there's 5 different components that you have to be aware of on the SAT. So one of those is we have an independent clause, right? That's going to be the most important component that you want to be aware of. We also have a dependent clause. We have a phrase, right? And then we have a couple of other ones. We have a list of items, and then we have adjectives in a list. Okay, so these are the 5 components that you want to be aware of that could show up in any given sentence. Now, the more of these components that you have in any given sentence, the longer, the more complicated, the more complex the sentence becomes. Okay, so you have to be able to identify, recognize, right, these components when they appear. You also have to, be aware of when they start, right, and when they finish, right, and when a new component shows up as well. And you also have to know how these components will work together, right, to create a grammatical and logical sentence, right? So the first thing that you want to know about these components is, first of all, every independent clause always has to have an independent, every complete sentence, every grammatical sentence must always have an independent clause in it, at least one. It can have 2, it can have 3, it just has to be properly punctuated, right? But every single sentence that you read that's grammatically correct, right, on the SAT has to have at least one independent clause in it. So that's what you're checking for first and foremost, okay? So here, the independent clause is actually going to be this, right? So scholar Candace Wade observes that the novel depicts the upper classes of New York society as consumed by the appetite of a soulless materialism. So the independent clause is going to end right there. That's your IC, okay? So, and then now the rest of these components, right, may show up in the sentence, or it may not. It just depends on the sentence that you're given, okay? So let me show you some other components. So this component here, in her analysis of Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, the comma, This component is a phrase, right? We also have this component here, a period marked by rapid industrialization, economic greed, and widening wealth disparities. This is also going to be a phrase, right? A phrase is just a group of words that it doesn't have a subject or a verb, right? And it also doesn't have a complete thought. Okay, so a phrase will never have like a verb inside of it, right? And so now we have, this is a phrase, and then now within this phrase, notice how we have, right, this industrialization, economic greed, and widening wealth disparities, right? That smaller component within this larger phrase, right, is what I call a list of items, right? A list is basically when you have items in a list, right? Industrialization, comma, economic greed, comma, and widening wealth disparities. So here I have a list of 3 items, right? Industrialization, economic greed, and widening wealth disparities. Why is that important for me to recognize? It's important because commas are going to be used, right, to separate each of the items in the list, right, when the list consists of more than 2 items. So when you have a list of like 3 items or more, you're going to see commas that come in between each of these list items. This is why you see a comma between industrialization, economic greed, and a comma between economic greed and widening wealth disparities, right? So this is what I'm saying is it's important to be able to identify the components in a sentence. And then now you have to be able to put all of this together, right? And then now understand how to make sense of the sentence, okay? So this is why this question is very, very difficult, very challenging. But so we'll work through it kind of step by step, okay? So by the end of this video, I guarantee you guys will, feel a lot more confident of how to work through sentence structure questions, right? And if you still have any questions, please leave them in the comment box below. I'll read them and I will reply to you guys, or I'll create another video, right, that teaches you more on sentence structure, okay? So the first thing that I want you guys to notice is this semicolon and the word and. So and, you guys, is part of these fanboys words, right? So the fanboys basically stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. These are the 7 coordinating conjunctions in the English language, right? Now, the grammar rule that you want to learn here is you never, right, do not combine a semicolon with a fanboys word, right, when you're trying to separate 2 independent clauses, okay? So semicolon is used to separate 2 independent clauses, but, right, you never want to use a fanboys word right after the semicolon. So don't do that, though, okay? So noticing that, we can cross out answer choice A, okay? Now look at answer choice D here where there's no punctuation. So when you read the sentence, when you read this part of the sentence, by the appetite of a soulless materialism and apt assessment. So when you guys just read this part, when you isolate this phrase, part of the sentence, you can ask yourself, well, hey, does it sound like it should be read together? Right? So when you read it, it sounds like it shouldn't be read together. You wouldn't group these words together. You wouldn't say, by the appetite of a soulless materialism and apt. Right? You wouldn't read it like it's one connected thought, right? It sounds like there should be a break or there should be some kind of interruption between materialism and an apt assessment, right? So because of that break, right, it sounds like there should be a disruption. We know that, hey there, we know that the semicolon, we know that the no punctuation or D is also going to be incorrect, okay? So now we're kind of working through this. So now we're going to be left with answer choices B and C, right? So let's work through these 2 guys now. So first of all, let's take a look at answer choice C here. I'll explain to you why this is right. So this is going to take some explanation. So you want to listen carefully here. So we have the independent clause, which says, Candace Wade observes that the novel depicts the upper classes of New York society as consumed by the appetite of a soulless materialism. That's your independent clause, okay? And then we have a comma after the independent clause, and then we have a phrase that comes afterwards, right? An apt assessment given that the House of Mirth is set during the Gilded Age. Okay, so this phrase, all phrases do is they just add additional information, right? But if we have this comma before the phrase, that tells us that this phrase is non-essential, In other words, the phrase adds additional or extra information, but it's not necessary, right, to the main idea of the sentence, right? Because the main idea of the sentence is what Candace Wade sees, right? How she thinks about, right, this novel. She observes that the novel depicts the upper classes as consumed by the appetite of a soulless materialism. Basically saying that these upper class, right, just kind of seem like they're just greedy, right? They're just superficial. They just want money, money, money. Okay, so that's going to be the main idea of the sentence, right? And this is where you guys, when you're reading grammatically, this also helps you to improve your reading comprehension, okay? Because the main idea of the sentence is going to be found in your independent clause, okay? And so this is where, if you have a long sentence like this, one big tip that I could give you is, and if you want to try to understand the sentence, the big tip that I could give you is start with your independent clause. If you can identify your independent clause, and that's where you can try to understand the meaning of this super long sentence, okay? So we have that there. Independent clause is going to be, right, Candace Wade's observation, right, of the upper class in this book, okay? Now, everything else now is just going to be giving you additional information, right? So now, and the way that you can think about additional information, guys, is through the form of questions, right? So this is where you can now start to piece things together, right, to better understand or better comprehend a super complicated sentence like this, okay? Because if you know that everyone knows the meaning of the independent clause now, right? It's how does Candace Wade view the upper class in this novel? Well, she views them as like soulless, materialistic people, right? They're just greedy, is it? Now, from there, I can ask you this question, right? I can ask you this question: which book does Candace Wade, right, make this observation? Well, she makes it in her, right, analysis of Edison Wharton's The House of Mirth, right? That's where she makes this observation, right? That's where this phrase here, notice how there's a comma here that separates that phrase from the independent clause, right? So this phrase is meant to tell us, right, where she made this assessment from and what book, right, that assessment came from. And I can ask you another question, right? Is how is this observation, like, what is the quality of this observation? Is it good or is it bad, right? So that the answer to that question is going to be answered by this phrase, right? An apt assessment, given that the House of Mirth is set during the Gilded Age. An apt assessment is basically an appropriate assessment, right? So this is just giving you additional information about the observation that Candace Wade made, right? The writer is saying that the observation that Candace Wade made was apt. It was appropriate, right? And then from there, the last question that I could ask you is, well, what's the Gilded Age? What's the Gilded Age? You would say it's a period marked by rapid industrialization, economic greed, and widening wealth disparities, right? So this would be your other component as well, okay? So notice how we have this comma that separates the Gilded Age and because we wouldn't read that like it's one connected thought. We wouldn't say during the Gilded Age, just like we wouldn't say the soulless materialism and apt. We wouldn't read that like it's one connected thought. There has to be some kind of break or some kind of disruption between these two components. And that's the purpose of these commas, right? Purpose of punctuation marks is to break up one component from another component, okay? And so you kind of see that happening here. So now, right, you can kind of see how answer choice C, did I cross that out as the wrong answer? Because this is the correct answer. You can see how answer choice C now is going to be correct, right? Because now this comma is going to be used to separate that independent clause, right? The analysis that Candace Wade made, right, from the phrase, right, about the quality of that analysis, right? It was appropriate, okay? And so that's a lot of times that you'll see that, right? You'll see this independent clause with the comma, and then what comes after the independent clause is the phrase. Usually it's like an ing phrase, but it doesn't always have to be, you know? But all you should know is these phrases that come after independent clauses will just be describing, right, the independent clause, just giving you extra information about it in some way, and this is still grammatically correct. Okay, so we can see how C is the correct answer now, right? Does that make sense? And so again, being able to identify these different components of a sentence, right? Identifying, the punctuation marks that separates one component from another, right? Also, figuring out, right, how each of these components kind of add up to make a sentence that has a logical meaning, right? So in order for you to figure out the meaning of the sentence, we don't always have to start in order. The biggest mistake that students make here when they're trying to understand the meaning of sentences is that they try to understand things in order, word for word, line by line. But you don't have to do that. Start with the independent clause, right? Understand what the independent clause is saying, and then from there, build it out from that understanding, right? So you can build it out by asking yourself questions like I asked you, right? So where did this come from, right? It came from her analysis of Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, right? And then from there is, what is the quality of the observation? Oh, it's appropriate. It's an apt assessment. What is the Gilded Age? Oh, it's a period marked by rapid industrialization, greed, and wealth disparities, right? So that can help you guys to kind of help you guys with reading comprehension as well. When you know grammar, you know how to read for comprehensions too, if you know how each of these components kind of add up, right, to create a logical meaning, okay? Now this is why C is going to be correct. Now, why is B wrong? Well, B is wrong, you guys, right? Not because it's grammatically wrong, but it's because it doesn't make any sense. It's logically incorrect, right? So this is where you're going to start to understand for the hardest level questions, the hardest questions for grammar, you not only have to think about grammar rules, but you also have to think about the meaning that's created, right? The logical meaning that's created from when you plug in this answer choice. So the mistake that a lot of students make is they just try to fix grammar rules, but they never consider the meaning, right? So what you want to do to avoid this, you can first start by checking your grammar rules. So notice how we checked our grammar rules and we were able to get rid of answer choice A and D, right? But if we plug in answer choice B here into the passage, it's not that it's grammatically wrong, right? Because it's saying that Candace Wade observes that the novel depicts the upper classes as consumed by the appetite of a soulless materialism and an apt assessment, given that the House of Mirth is set during the Gilded Age, right? So it could make it seem like now this whole thing is your independent clause, right? So grammatically, it's not that there's anything wrong because the word and can be used to combine two nouns, right? A soulless materialism and an apt assessment. It can be used to combine two nouns like that, right? So, but the reason why this is wrong is we have to consider the logical meaning that's created from B. Like we have to ask ourselves, does this make any sense? Right? Does it make sense to you? Does the meaning make sense? Right? And so you think about it, it makes no sense at all, right? Why? Because and connects these two ideas. And connects the ideas of a soulless, so, and connects the ideas of a soulless materialism and an apt assessment. How are these nouns being used? Well, it's being used to tell us that it's the appetite of a soul materialism and an apt assessment, right? So these two nouns, these two words or phrases are being used to tell us how these upper class people, right, are shown, right? How these upper class people are, are greedy. Yeah, are greedy. Okay, so you think about the meaning that's created from answer choice B, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because if you're trying to describe the upper class people of New York, you're describing them as being greedy, and you're describing them as being an apt assessment, right? Like, how does that make any sense at all? The apt assessment is not being used to describe the people of New York, but the apt assessment is being used to describe the analysis, right, that Candace Wade gave, right, about her observations of the upper class of New York society, right? So this is where the logical meaning makes no sense when you plug in B. Okay, so remember that you're not just trying to fix the grammar, right, by following punctuation rules or eliminating answers that violate punctuation rules, but you want to then go one level up, right? Especially when you have two answer choices that are both grammatically correct. At that point, you have to decide which one makes more sense, which one makes more logical sense, right? So we talked about why C makes sense when we put all of the components together, right? Because each of these components are being used to kind of give you more description or more information about the independent clause, right? The main message of the sentence, okay? So this is why, you guys, right? C will be the correct answer for this question. Hopefully that was, helpful for you guys. Hopefully that all of that stuff made sense, because it is very advanced stuff. If something didn't make sense, you guys, please write that in the comment box below, and I'll be sure to kind of respond to you guys. Other than that, you guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.